Did ancient people actually map the quantum realm, or are we just projecting modern physics onto ancient stones?
Well, I mean, that is the million-dollar question right there.
Right. Welcome, deep divers. I am so thrilled to have you back with us here in the deep dive classroom. Today, we are going to experience some serious aha moments as we learn to separate hard archaeological evidence from, well, poetic modern metaphors.
And it is so easy to get those two mixed up, especially with all the viral claims out there.
Exactly. So today we are taking excerpts from a really fascinating text called Ancient Astronomy and Modern Physics, Evidence versus Analogy. And we're going to explore exactly what happens when ancient monuments meet modern science. It's a wild ride, so wherever you are right now, grab a notebook or just think along with us as we navigate this massive intersection of archaeoastronomy and physics.
It's going to be a fun one.
It really is. Oh, and before we jump into the deep end, just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and check out the affiliate marketing links in our description. You can also grab some of our brand new Fourth Wall merchandise, and please drop your suggestions for new topics in the comments. We love reading those.
We really do.
All right, so I am joined, as always, by our resident expert, and I just have to ask, where do we even begin with a claim as massive as Neolithic builders understood quantum physics?
Yeah, we have to begin by drawing a very firm, very necessary line in the sand between evidence and analogy. This text lays out a brilliant two-layer thesis to help us navigate all these claims.
Okay, lay it on me, layer one.
Layer one is the evidence. So this is the grounded archaeological reality that early societies carefully tracked periodicity.
Meaning the observable cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Precisely. And they used their architecture and their art to store, display, and ritualize that cyclical time. That's layer one. Layer two, however, is the analogy. Modern physics also relies heavily on deep notions of periodicity, resonance, phase, and precise measurement.
So because of that shared vocabulary, it's just incredibly easy to draw some really compelling parallels.
Right. But, and this is the crucial part we'll be discussing today, those parallels must be explicitly labeled as metaphor, not as proof of historical equivalence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because honestly, the hard evidence we do have for layer one is absolutely mind-blowing on its own. We really don't need to invent quantum theories when we look at what these ancient builders actually accomplished.
No, we don't. The real archaeology is impressive enough.
Take Stonehenge, for example. English heritage highlights its deliberate, undeniable relationship to the solstices. The stones are perfectly aligned with the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. It's a massive architectural feat.
It is, and it required generations of observation to get right.
And then you have Newgrange over in Ireland. I was looking at this 2024 high-resolution research report on it, and it's just wild. The National Museum of Ireland considers this purpose-built roof box to be the site's most important feature.
Oh, the roof box is incredible.
Right. During the winter solstice sunrise, this tiny opening perfectly channels a narrow beam of sunlight all the way down a long, dark stone passage to illuminate the inner chamber. It's like a spotlight turning on in the dark.
Which is just a brilliant use of light in architecture.
And Newgrange isn't just sitting there alone. It's part of the massive Brú na Bóinne UNESCO landscape, surrounded by other huge mounds like Noath and Douth. So they were clearly tracking celestial cycles. Based on that precision, it seems like they basically built a massive stone hard drive to store their astronomical data.
I get exactly why you'd call it that, but here's where we have to be really careful with a term like data storage. True numerical data storage requires a system of writing and revisable records. It requires specific dates, observed positions, and a way to log anomalies.
Like actual ledgers of information.
Exactly. For example, if you go to the British Museum, they hold Mesopotamian clay tablets called astronomical diaries. Those are systematic, structured data records where scholars literally wrote down planetary movements night after night.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or look at the Maya civilization. The SLUB library in Dresden houses the Dresden Codex. It's an incredible document made of bark paper that contains highly complex written astronomical tables tied to their calendrical systems. That is literal data storage.
So it's the difference between an Excel spreadsheet and a monument.
What's fascinating here is that organizations like ICOMOS, IAU, and UNESCO actually encourage us to use tighter, more precise language for this exact reason. These megalithic monuments don't function as numerical archives. You can't go to Stonehenge and look up where Mars was on a Tuesday in 2500 BCE.
Right, it doesn't work like a database.
Instead, these structures materialize, index, or ritualize those astronomical cycles.
That is such a great distinction. Deep divers, let's do a quick thought experiment right now. Look around the room you were in. If you see a digital clock on your microwave or your phone, that is literal numerical data storage. It is feeding you specific, revisable numbers.
A perfect modern example of layer 1 data.
Exactly. Now imagine a window in your house that always, without fail, lets in a perfect square of morning sun onto your kitchen table at the exact same time every day. That window is a materialized cycle. Which one feels more like Newgrange?
It's the window,
It's
definitely.
one window, right. It's highly engineered, but it's experiential. But this brings up a huge pivot point for me. If these stone monuments track the cycles of time so incredibly well, does that mean their builders were mapping the actual concept of time in the same way modern physics does?
Yeah.
Because I constantly see articles comparing ancient stone circles to time dilation.
And that is exactly where the danger of forcing modern linear physics onto ancient sites really rears its head. The ancient concept of cyclical time, this deep agricultural idea of seasons looping, of eternal return and renewal, is profoundly different from the modern physics concept of time.
It's a completely different paradigm.
It really is. To see how heated this gets within the actual scientific community, we just have to look at the massive academic debate over whether Stonehenge is a literal functional calendar.
Oh, I read about this. This was a huge fight recently, wasn't it?
It was. In 2022, a researcher named Timothy Darville proposed a really specific theory. He suggested that the arrangement of the sarsen stones at Stonehenge encodes a 365.25-day perpetual calendar based on the solar year.
How did that work exactly?
He argued that if you take the 30 upright sarsen stones, multiply them by 12 months, and add in the 5 trilithons in the center, you get this perfect solar calendar model.
It sounds incredibly elegant when you put it like that.
It does. But just a year later, in 2023, Giulio Magli and Juan Antonio Belmonte published a fierce critique of this idea in the journal Antiquity.
So what was their counter-argument? Because the math seems to add up if you explain it the way Darville did.
Their critique was that to make the math work, you have to selectively ignore certain stones, emphasize others that might not have been part of the original phase, and essentially force the monument to fit a preconceived modern notion of a calendar.
Oh, so cherry-picking the data to fit the theory.
Exactly. They called it unsubstantiated numerology driven by unsupported analogies. It perfectly illustrates how desperately we want to read our modern tracking of time into ancient stones. We want them to be ancient versions of us.
So what does this all mean for the physics side of things? If Stonehenge isn't necessarily a giant 365-day calculator, how does that contrast with what time actually means in modern physics? Because earlier you mentioned time dilation, and I want to make sure we define that properly.
Right, when we bring modern physics into the mix, we are looking at an entirely different time story. The ancients built incredible architectural machines for staging cyclical return. But modern physics treats time as a measurable, variable dimension that is woven into space itself.
Space-time, essentially.
Yes. If we look at Albert Einstein's 1905 special relativity framework, time dilation isn't a vague, metaphorical fluidity of time. It is a precisely quantified effect. Einstein showed that motion and gravity directly affect the measured rate of time.
Meaning time literally moves slower or faster depending on how fast you're traveling or how close you are to a massive object like the Earth.
Precisely. And this is tested and proven daily. The National Institute of Standards and Technology highlights how this is verified by flying incredibly precise portable atomic clocks on airplanes and comparing their tick rates to identical clocks left on the ground.
And the ones on the planes are literally ticking at a different speed.
The clocks on the planes literally experience less time. Furthermore, NASA has to actively account for relativistic time dilation effects in their GPS satellite timing. Because those satellites were moving very fast in orbit and they are further away from Earth's gravity well, their onboard clocks tick at a different rate than our receivers on the ground.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. If NASA didn't use Einstein's math to constantly correct for that drift, our entire global navigation system would fail within a day.
Imagine that contrast for a second, deep divers. Think about tracking the passing of a year by watching a shadow return to the exact same groove on a standing stone versus tracking microseconds on a GPS satellite orbiting the Earth to keep your phone's map working.
It's a completely different scale of reality.
Notice how those two frameworks completely change how you experience the concept of time itself. The ancient stones are majestic, but they absolutely do not encode Einstein's math.
Exactly. There are fundamentally different ways of engaging with the universe.
But let's take that a step further. If the structural alignments don't tell a physics story, what about the art? Because here's where it gets really interesting to me. If you go into those Boyne Valley passage tombs we talked about, like Noth, or you look at the massive entrance stone at Newgrange, you are met with these deeply mesmerizing, prominent
The
carvings.
megalithic art there is truly stunning.
It is. I'm talking about intricate spirals, lozenges, and chevrons carved directly into the rock. And when I look at those repeating, overlapping spirals, my mind immediately jumps to wave-particle duality. It looks exactly like a modern diagram of quantum mechanics.
It is incredibly tempting to make that leap. And to understand why, we should briefly define what wave-particle duality actually is. In classical physics, things were either particles, like tiny billiard balls, or they were waves, like ripples on a pond.
Right, they were two entirely separate categories.
But the Encyclopedia Britannica outlines how Thomas Young's famous double-slit interference experiment changed everything. When he shined light through two parallel slits, it didn't just create two lines on the wall behind it. It created a whole pattern of alternating bright and dark stripes.
An interference pattern.
Yes, which proved light acts as a wave, overlapping and interacting with itself.
And then it gets even weirder with matter, doesn't it?
It does. Later on, building on the work of Louis de Broglie, quantum concepts showed that matter itself, electrons, atoms, also has wave properties. If you fire single electrons through those double slits, one by one, over time, their individual particle detections build up the exact same wave-like probability pattern. It completely shattered our classical understanding of reality.
Which is exactly why people look at a Neelophic spiral and think, aha, they knew. It looks like a wave function.
It does look like one, but we have to maintain our methodological rigor here. The leap from spirals exist on this rock to these spirals deliberately depict quantum wave functions is purely an interpretive analogy. There is zero mainstream archaeological evidence that Neolithic builders encoded quantum theory.
So what are we actually seeing when we look at that art?
What is actually happening there is a profound psychological and aesthetic resonance.
What do you mean by psychological resonance?
So both domains, ancient megalithic art and modern quantum mechanics, force the human mind to step away from naive, linear intuition. Ancient cultures were learning to closely observe their natural world and realize that everything fundamental happens in cycles, the seasons, the moon, life, and death. So they developed a visual language of cyclicality.
And then physics caught up later.
Thousands of years later, modern physics discovered mathematically that nature insists that cycles, phase, and probability are fundamental to reality at the subatomic level. So the spirals are a visual exploration of cycles, not a prehistoric diagram of quantum mechanics.
It's funny how our brains crave those patterns. Think about the repeating rhythms you encounter in your daily life. The rhythm of your breathing, the visual pattern of a tiled floor, the chorus of your favorite song. Humans are psychologically and aesthetically drawn to resonance and periodic patterns.
We look for it everywhere.
Recognizing that bias helps us understand exactly why we are so tempted to connect an ancient spiral to a modern physics textbook. We are hardwired to look for resonance. But it's not just a visual trick, right? Because I was reading that there is actual physical resonance happening inside these tombs that you can literally feel in your chest.
Yes, this is where the hard science actually supports the extraordinary, almost magical nature of these sites without needing to invent quantum mysticism. A recent, highly detailed, peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Archaeological Science explored this. Researchers used scale modeling methods to reconstruct the original acoustics of Stonehenge.
Wait, how do you scale model the acoustics of a giant stone circle? That sounds impossible.
It is brilliant, actually. They literally 3D printed a highly accurate 1:12 scale model of Stonehenge based on laser scans of the stones, including the ones that are missing today. Then they placed tiny speakers and microphones inside it and played ultrasonic sounds scaled up in frequency to match the miniature size of the model.
That is such a clever way to test it. What did they find?
What they found was that Stonehenge produced a highly reverberant environment with significant speech amplification. If you were standing in the center, a voice would be amplified and sustained in a way that would sound incredibly powerful, while someone standing outside the circle would barely hear it.
That is amazing. They engineered a prehistoric surround sound system.
Essentially, yes. A related piece in the journal Antiquity also explored the cognitive considerations of acoustics at archaeological sites. The builders intentionally created spaces that sounded profoundly different from the open landscape around them. It induces a sense of awe.
And that's totally natural physics at work.
Furthermore, the Earth itself has real electromagnetic phenomena that interact with our environment. We have a protective geomagnetic field, We also have what are called Schumann resonances.
I've seen that term thrown around a lot in alternative history forums. What exactly is a Schumann resonance?
It sounds incredibly sci-fi, but it's a natural atmospheric phenomenon. The space between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere above it acts as a giant, closed, resonant cavity. Lightning strikes happening all over the globe act like an antenna, pumping electromagnetic energy into this cavity.
So it's powered by global lightning storms.
Yes, this creates extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves that constantly circle the Earth. Those are Schumann resonances.
Okay, so the acoustic resonance is real, and the Earth's electromagnetic resonance is real. But people take those real facts and they stretch them to the breaking point, don't they? You see claims online that these megaliths formed a literal global network using quantum entanglement to synchronize human biology with the Earth's fields.
Yes, and that is where we leave archaeology entirely and enter the realm of pure fantasy. That claim lacks any serious scientific backing. If we connect this to the bigger picture of what quantum entanglement actually is in physics, the metaphor completely falls apart.
Let's translate that jargon then. What makes true quantum entanglement different from just feeling connected to a sacred landscape?
Real quantum entanglement, which, by the way, was awarded the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, is a highly specific, measurable phenomenon. It involves what physicists call Bell inequality violations.
And in plain English, a Bell inequality violation is what exactly?
It is essentially a mathematical proof. John Bell formulated a theorem showing that if particles are communicating locally, there was a strict limit on how correlated their properties could be. When experiments violate that limit, a Bell inequality violation, it proves that the particles are interacting in a bizarre, non-local, instantaneous way that classical physics says is impossible.
Spooky action at a distance, as
Ah,
Einstein called it.
exactly. If you measure the spin of one entangled particle, you instantly know the spin of the other, even if it's light years away. But, and this is the key, creating and maintaining that entanglement requires tightly controlled, artificially prepared quantum systems.
You mean like highly isolated labs, lasers, and supercooled environments, not open fields in prehistoric Britain.
Exactly. It is an incredibly delicate physical state used in quantum computing. It is absolutely not a vague feeling of energetic connection between two stone circles in different countries. Using the word entanglement to describe shared ritual calendars or a distributed network of monuments is strictly a poetic metaphor.
Let's ground this right now with a simple physical action. The next time you step into an empty, echoing hallway or a tiled bathroom, just snap your fingers. Listen to how the sound bounces, sustains, and changes. That change in speech and sound is acoustic resonance.
Something you can experience every day.
Exactly. It is a real physical property that ancient builders intimately understood, experienced, and engineered for. You do not need quantum entanglement to explain why singing inside the Newgrange Passage tomb feels magical. It just is magical, based on the physics of sound.
Could not have said it better myself.
And understanding that firm distinction between real, measured science and wild speculation is the perfect tool for tackling a massive claim that has been circulating the internet recently regarding the year 2026.
Ah, yes. The supposed 2026 breakthrough in archaeophysics.
I've seen this everywhere. The claim suggests that carbon-based ancient structures have been discovered to actually be tuned to detect gravitational waves, and that all will be revealed in 2026. It sounds like the plot of a blockbuster sci-fi movie.
It really does, and that's essentially what it is. Science fiction. Let's look at what detecting a gravitational wave actually requires in established science. Gravitational waves, which finally earned the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2017, are mind-bendingly tiny ripples, or distortions, in the actual fabric of space-time, usually caused by black holes colliding billions of light years away.
So by the time those ripples reach Earth, they must be unfathomably small.
Unfathomably small is an understatement. To detect them, the LIGO Lab, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, uses enormous, highly advanced facilities. We are talking about concrete facilities with perpendicular arms that are 4 kilometers long, maintained in a perfect ultra-high vacuum.
And what are they doing inside those 4-kilometer tubes?
They are acting as laser interferometers. They shoot a high-powered laser beam, split it down the 2 4-kilometer arms, and bounce it off finely polished, perfectly suspended mirrors.
Sounds incredibly delicate.
It is. When the beams recombine, they create an interference pattern. If a gravitational wave rolls through the Earth, it stretches spacetime in one direction and compresses it in the other, changing the distance the lasers travel by a fraction of the width of a single proton. A recent explainer from NIST echoes this need for extreme, almost incomprehensible technological sensitivity to measure that change.
So, an ancient, weathered rock sitting on a hill, no matter how perfectly aligned it is with the solstice, is not doing the job of a 4-kilometer laser vacuum tube with suspended mirrors.
Precisely. It is physically impossible. The 2026 archaeophysics claim is either a fictional what-if premise meant for storytelling, or it is a massive, fundamental misinterpretation of real, modern physics advances.
What happens in 2026 then? Is there a real physics event happening?
Yes. In 2026, the astrophysics community might see massive new data catalogs released from pulsar timing arrays.
Pulsar timing arrays, what are those?
This is a real brilliant method where astronomers use the highly regular flashing of dead stars and pulsars as a galaxy-sized detector to study background gravitational waves. But those are purely astrophysics advances. They have absolutely nothing to do with archaeology or ancient carbon structures on Earth. The internet just mashed the two concepts together.
Incredible. So next time you see a viral article claiming a Neolithic stone circle is functioning as a space-time distortion detector, you'll know exactly where the archaeology ends and the sci-fi poetry begins. Know the difference between evidence and analogy.
That is the crucial lesson.
And with that, let's wrap up today's deep dive. To summarize our key takeaways for you deep divers, the strongest evidence we have shows that prehistoric monuments were not random piles of rocks. They were sophisticated, highly intentional feats of engineering that map sky knowledge, seasonal practice, and social memory through precise alignments and repeatable light and sound events.
And modern physics is in many ways a highly disciplined mathematical extension of that exact same human impulse. We are still looking at the universe, observing its regularities, and trying to turn them into formal explanations.
We just use different tools now.
Exactly. We can absolutely use modern physics concepts as a beautiful metaphor to appreciate the profound nature of ancient sites. But we must maintain the epistemic humility to admit that it's just an analogy, not historical proof. Recognizing this doesn't diminish the achievements of the ancients. This clarity actually makes their real historical ingenuity more profound.
I couldn't agree more. It makes them more human and honestly more brilliant. Deep divers, we want to hear your thoughts on this. Please drop your reflections, your aha moments, and your questions in the comments below. Take a moment to practice spotting the poetry versus the proof in your daily reading. And make sure you are subscribed because our next deep dive in the classroom series is going to be just as thrilling.
This raises an important question to leave you with, however. Building on our discussion of how easily we humans misinterpret monuments and our desperate desire for data storage, imagine archaeologists 5,000 years in the future.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They're digging up the ruins of our civilization, and they uncover the 4-kilometer underground concrete tunnels of Lego, or maybe they find a piece of a defunct GPS satellite buried in the dirt. Without our cultural context, without our textbooks, will they look at the incredibly precise measurements, the mirrors, and the perfect alignments of our modern physics instruments, and mistakenly assume they were just giant religious calendars meant to materialize the cycles of the sun?